Okay, so this is just a little demo on how to use the plugins, how to kind of look for the parts and pieces to get it all to work. So what I'm going to do here is I went to this site here and I'm just looking around. And then I decided I was going to do one of these plugins. And so the one I went down to was the Magnifique pop-up. Okay, so look in here, you can see there's some plugin information. It's lightweight, da da da. And so what I wanted to do here then is I would go into the link for this pop-up, kind of look around, and you can see here all the different features of it, etc. And then I started looking around and I see, okay, so how's it made? Documentation, GitHub is where the files are. I don't need the WordPress plugin. How about the build tool? Well, the build tool will let me take features and only put the features I need into the JS file that's going to be required. So as you're going along, that might be something worth looking into. But the first thing I did was I went into documentation and looked around, and immediately I saw that I'm going to need a CSS page, and I'm just going to call it by the same names. Um, and then they also had, you can see here, link to already hosted jQuery. So they were using 1.9.1. And so I'm going to use that just to keep things consistent. And then I'm also going to make a JS file. So the next thing I did then was I went over and I made myself a file and I called it popup.html. And right away I put in those links to the script and to the CSS. And what I did here then was to create, using Dreamweaver, a new CSS file, a new JavaScript file, and then I'm going to have to go find the code to put in there. But first I wanted to make sure all these links showed up, and then so you can see this requires this one, and this one, which was, again, in this first section here, it told me I needed to do all that. Then I started looking down here and I'm going initializing pop-up. Okay, so in the document.ready, here would be just one way to do it. And then as I'm going along, I find there's lots of different ways to do this and initialize them. So I'm kind of like, oh, okay, so you can do images that pop up. You can have iframes that pop up, and there's some different code here. Here's an inline pop-up. So I'm kind of looking around, seeing all these options. Okay, so then I'm going back up to the top, and I'm thinking, okay, what else do I want to do here? And so now I'm starting to see, well, maybe I need to be specific and just try to get one thing to work before I get all crazy and get all the other pieces to work. Because if I pull this way, there's actually a lot of different variations on this of different things that I want to happen in the pop-up window. Okay, so then I kind of go play with examples of CodePen. Oh, okay, so I'm working through here and I'm looking around, and the one I decided to do, keep going here, was this one, the inline pop-up. In other words, I didn't have to go find some content to try to get this to work, because if I do this one, then if I click here, it'll make a pop-up that's just, there's nothing in it except some text. And then if I go here, it's the same kind of thing. So one is just based off a link and one is based off of the button here. Okay, so that means then I have to start looking at what they needed specifically for that. So I copy pasted this piece, the HTML, into the body of my example file. So there, I ended up with that. I'm good. And then in the CSS, I saw I'm going to need this. Now, I'm going to show you this in just a minute here. This is an additional piece I need to add into the CSS. But what I did then is I copy pasted that. And you can see that I just put it at the top of the CSS that I'm eventually going to have. Okay, and then I went over here, and this is the JavaScript, and again I want to do it on the document.ready. So I copy pasted this, And again, I went back to my original area. So here's one of the copy paste areas. Here was a copy paste. And now if I go up here in the document.ready, that's a copy paste. So again, what I'm doing is I'm using their example, trying to get it to work, and then I can go off and do other things and I can try some more examples. But I'm just piecing the pieces together. So most of this one right here is going to get me to my HTML file to work together. The other pieces though, the jquery.min.js, that's actually coming from the server, so I'm going to leave that alone. And that was determined by this link. Now note, I actually put in the HTTP colon before their slashes because what I wanted to do here was to make sure that it worked, because I wasn't getting it to come in until I did that. So then the next thing I wanted to do was to go find the rest of the CSS file. Okay, so I went back here and I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, let's go back. And I ended up going back to the documentation. I'm trying to get my stuff going here. Okay, so the documentation. All right, I'm not sure, so I'm going back. I'm going to go back one more. And then I remember that GitHub is where they have all the files. So somewhere along the line, I saw that if you go into the distribution folder on GitHub, you're going to find the pieces that you need. Now you can use the minified version of the pop-up. Just make sure you put that in your link. Or you can use this. So then I open this up and I copy pasted all this stuff into the jquery.magnifique popup.js. So then I come back over here, and that's where all this came from. So you can see it's a match from this to this. Okay, so then I backed up. It's a little tedious, but you can see it's just a matter of finding all the pieces. So then I said, okay, now I need the rest of the CSS. So if I copy pasted all of this into the CSS, you can see then that this is a match for this, and that I have that additional piece that was specifically made for that inline version of the pop-up. And then at this point I'm going, okay, well, keep testing. And I did have a few little glitches here and there. For one thing, when I made my CSS file, I had a space at the end here, and it wasn't connecting because that extra space made the name different. So once I got everything to work, then I could go in here and I could preview it. And now if I click Show Inline Pop-up, there's that one. And if I click this, there's that one. And a couple other things though, again, if I go into the documentation for this, or I go into what the other pieces here, then you're going to see that there are a lot more that we could go into, especially if we went into that play with examples, and then we can copy paste, make things change that way. But I did want to just point out in the source code here that if I go in here in this pop-up, there's just this really interesting little piece. This one is actually the pop-up for this, only in the code it gets hidden. Okay, so just keep in mind that the way they put everything together, sometimes you have to start just thinking through and picking the items apart after the fact. So there we go. So again, the pieces ended up being, first of all, in the documentation I found out what I had to include, and then I had to figure out how to get the pieces together. And by doing that, I went to the GitHub repository. And then sometimes this is also where you can find additional pieces like the licensing and the README file and stuff like that. But basically, once I got into here, then I could find the files that needed to be included. So